All right. So what what is Django? Can anybody tell me what Django is?
Children's game.
I'm sorry?
Never mind.
Yeah. He said it's a movie too with Jamie Foxx.
Okay.
It's a Python framework.
Okay, it's a Python framework. So what is a framework? Or what is a software framework?
It's like a template that you can essentially put in your content and you follow their guidelines, and it will make the code work a certain way to present it the way that you want or they want.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. All right. So Django is a full stack framework. So you can do front end development, back end development, all in Django. So Django is a full stack software framework, specifically in Python. And a framework is essentially a foundation of instructions or like ethos on how to build applications. So a bunch of developers got together and are like, we think we know the best way to build a web application. And in order to do so, you must follow these specific steps. The data flows has a specific pattern. It has specific attributes and objects and just very specific functionality, and that you must follow in order to build these web framework or these web applications. And there isn't a right or wrong answer to a framework. It's literally just like, we think we know the best way to develop a specific software, whether it's a web front end, like a web framework, or like a back end framework, or a front end framework, or like a CSS framework. And these developers think that this is the best way to do so. And but there isn't a right or wrong way. You can use, there's a plethora of different frameworks out there. I know someone just mentioned Flask. Flask is another Python framework. There's React, there's Angular, there's Vue.js. Those are more front-end frameworks, or also libraries. So if you think of a framework as a set of instructions on how to build something. So if you think of like a recipe, like chocolate chip cookies recipe, like I might have a specific framework on how I think the best chocolate chip cookie should be made. So all the ingredients, the steps to do so, and that's how I think of it. So like there's a chocolate chip cookie framework and how I think like a chocolate chip cookie should be made. Whereas there's a plethora of other different chocolate chip cookie frameworks or recipes with different ingredients and different steps, amounts, and all their different attributes to that specific recipe. So there isn't like a tried and true right or wrong answer on what the best framework is. What questions do you have about frameworks?
Can you explain the difference between a library and a framework? Because I've heard people call, like React, for instance, a framework or a library.
Right. So a framework can have multiple different libraries. So a framework might require multiple different libraries, whereas a library, I would say a framework is a specific set of instructions on how to execute something, like how to build something. Whereas a library can just be a bunch of different methods that perform specific actions. So like a specific library might just be like a time parsing library. That's all it is. It comes with a couple of methods that parses time for human readable, because a lot of times time or date time is stored in a very non-readable format. So a library can literally just have a method on there that parses that So that wouldn't be a framework. That's more of just a library with a method that is able to parse something to a human readable. Whereas a framework is a specific set of instructions, or as I said, like an ethos of like almost like a religion of this is how I think it should be built, and this is how the data it must flow in order for it to work. And again, frameworks can have have libraries, or yeah, frameworks could have libraries embedded in them, or frameworks could require libraries for it to run as well. So a framework is a very specific, this is how it should be done, whereas a library is like just a bunch of built-in methods that do something. And oh, sorry, and just to piggyback off that, you've heard that, you know, React is a library, is also as a framework. I also intermingle them. Like I say, it's a front-end framework, but I think in actuality, it is a, I mean, it's technically a library, but like I would say it's more so like a framework. Just because of how complex it is, I would say. I don't know. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just gonna ask, would you say that Django is like more junior developer friendly than the rest of the framework?
Yes. And the reason why Django is so popular is because in order to get a web framework or a web application up, you have to do a lot of stuff. Like, all right, you need to create databases. You might need to create users. A lot of times when you build a web application, you might need like an admin portals for administrative users. You might need to do like, when you do build web applications, you have to do like password management and all of that. Django does that, has that all built in it for you. So you don't have to worry about that. It takes all the heavy lifting off of you. So, cause like those are pretty standard features or functionality of every web application, generally speaking. So like Django, all the engineers that built Django, like, you know what, since that's a very common, those like features and functionality are very common in every single web application, we're going to just go ahead and build that for you. So you don't have to keep on, you know, reinventing the wheel. So we're just going to do that for you. Yeah. So I mean, it's definitely, it's the fastest way to get a full stack web application up and running. And it's used all over the place. Yeah. Yeah, good questions. Keep them coming. So the specific Django is a high-level Python web framework that encourages rapid development, clean programmatic design built by experienced developers. It takes care of much of the hassle of web development, so you can focus on writing your app without needing to reinvent the wheel. It's free and it's open source. All right. Yeah, I just read that off of, I think, their website or something. All right. So let's talk about Django and like what are the main components of a Django application. So here's just a visual representation. We have this virtual environment. Have we talked about virtual environments like last week? Yep.
A couple weeks ago.
Okay. What is a virtual environment and why do we use one?
Isn't it like basically somewhere you can download certain libraries and not care if it messes anything up because you can just delete it afterward?
Yeah, it's like yeah, that's a good one. Does anybody else? And like why do we? Yeah. Does anybody else have something
I
else?
was gonna say it's like what I think that was Kyle said. So that you can download certain things to that virtual environment so that you're not downloading it and messing with your local, like your actual machine.
Yeah, exactly. So if you think of a virtual environment as like a bubble, you're creating a bubble inside of your local machine, and you can install anything you want inside of that bubble, and it won't affect anything in your other on your machine. So you might have multiple web applications. So in one web application inside that virtual environment, it might use like a very specific version of Django or some specific library, where in another project inside that virtual environment might need a different version of that same library. So you don't have these different web applications like whatever is installed, the libraries, the frameworks, or whatever installed, they're not messing with one another. Because when you are in your first job and you are working with web applications, you know, some of your web applications are going to have different versions. So one day you might be working on a web application that uses one version, whereas on another you might be working on another web application that uses a different version of the same library. So you want to keep those versions separate. That's why you kind of create a virtual environment. So it's like a little bubble inside your local machine that you can install whatever you want, and it won't affect, as I think it was Kyle, who won't affect anything outside of that virtual environment. All right. What other questions do you have about virtual environment?
Is it good practice to just create one for pretty much any time you're developing an app?
Specifically Django, it's best practice to. But once we get into React, they don't have like virtual environments. So like specifically Django utilizes virtual environments. Not every web application on every language uses virtual environments. There's other ways to manage those different versions in different frameworks and yeah. So, but for when you're developing a Django web application, always have a virtual environment. And we're going to get into that. What other questions do you have? All right. So we talk about these web applications, but Django, so if you think of a Django, there's a top level, it's called a Django project. And a project can consist of many applications or many apps, as they call them. So again, at the very top level, you have a Django project. That's what you're going to first create. And then inside of your Django project is where you're going to actually create your applications or your apps. So a Django project could have many apps. And we're going to get into like what that means. And we're going to walk through all this. We're going to walk through this today. So if you think of Amazon, the company, the massive, I don't know if it's the most valuable company, but yeah, Amazon. If you think of Amazon as a Django project, so I'm going to create a new company. I'm going to call it Amazon. That's my Django project. And within Amazon, it has many different applications. So Amazon has many different applications. So for example, when you go to their website and you check out, so like you might have a consumer checkout that is its own application. Amazon Alexa might be another application. They might need a billing app to bill clients, whether it's business B2B clients or B2C, business to consumer clients. Amazon Prime might be an application. There's Amazon Music, Amazon Photos. They probably have a huge inventory management system, which will also be its own application. So all those are like different pieces of code and different apps that are separated within one large Django project. What questions do you have about that?
So to use a more basic example, if we were to make like an individual project, we're making like a website for a coffee store, would the project be called, whatever the name of the coffee store is, that's the project name, and then the kind of like the features would be the applications inside of it?
Yeah, you can kind of think of it like that. Yeah, so like it'd be like, all right, Kristen's coffee store or coffee store project. And then inside of there, it can be, one of your apps will be the checkout. If that's like the main, if it's like a consumer, something like that. And I just want to let you all know that we probably will not, I don't think we do create more than one app in our Django projects throughout this course. So it's generally typically Django project with one app inside of the Django project.
So are we saying that an app is a particular website or web page?
No, an app would be like a specific functionality of your applications. So if you think of like what is it? The school, the student, then we have like one of our past projects or challenges, like the school interface. Like school interface would be like how you store the students and staff and retrieve them. That would be one application to store all that information. Is that helpful?
Yeah, so it's, I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around if it's, think of an app as more of the back end
Yeah.
to process the data,
Yeah.
not so much the user interface.
Correct. You can think of it like that, but each app can have its own user interface, and there is ways for apps to like cross one another. So if one app's front end interacts with another app's front end or back end, that you have that capability.
So like that would be the case in Amazon's webpage where all the pages have kind of a default style and template.
Yep.
Where then each app uses that default template.
Yep. Yeah. So you like from a functionality standpoint, that's technically you're technically capable of doing that.
For if you have a project and let's say you also have like a mobile application and you want Django to be the backend for both, is that still just one app?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, good questions. What other questions do you have? All right.
Is that a good way to think about it, the back end aspect? So if they have different data they're collecting and they don't actually use the same data, now they should be in different virtual environments using different Django.
So this is all within one virtual environment. So the same apps, so different apps are all going to be existing within the same virtual environment. So you have one Django project inside of one virtual environment. And then inside of that Django project consists of many apps. It's all contained in the same virtual environment. As far as the data, I wouldn't say it's back end versus front end, but like an application, think of it like if there's very specific functionality, like an inventory management system is very specific. It's totally different than maybe Amazon Alexa, like the functionality of that. I wouldn't necessarily say front end and back end, or front end is totally separate because you can technically go between apps. But yeah, like the inventory management system might have different tables, might have different functionality, different methods than the Amazon Alexa app. So I would say those would be two different apps. I don't know if that was helpful.
Can I just add that there's also, in addition, there's also Django has a whole bunch of built-in apps that it comes with by default. So one of them, for example, is there's a built-in authentication system. So that counts as an app. So there's a specific piece of functionality that you can incorporate into your larger project.
Yeah. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, it's a good reminder is that, Django comes with built-in applications already inside of it. And we're going to see them all today, or you're going to at least see parts of them today. All right. So here are the actual commands to create a new Django project. And we'll walk through all this. And again, today we're specifically going to be covering the ORM within Django's ORM. And so we're going to be covering all this again on like Thursday. So in order to create a new virtual environment, we run Python -m venv and then the name of the virtual environment. And then we enter into our virtual environment by doing source, the name of our virtual environment /bin/activate. So now we're inside of our virtual environment. So then we want to install Django because this is a brand new application or a brand new project that has nothing installed in it. So we need to do pip install Django, which installs Django into our virtual environment. And then once we have Django installed, we have access to a bunch of command prompts from Django in order to start a project, start app, and do a bunch of different functionality within Django. So we installed Django. Now we actually have to create a Django project. And there's a built-in command in Django called Django-admin start project, followed by the project name. So that creates a Django project, which is, okay, cool. And then we need to create an app. So, so we've got our Django project. We go into our Django project, and then we run the Python manage.py. So that is actually a file within Django, but it also has a bunch of command utility that allows us to interact with our Django app. So we do Python manage.py start app, followed by our app name. And then that's when we actually start creating our apps. And so yeah, let's actually just start going through this. All right. So let's start at the very, so yeah, let's just go through the slides first, and then we'll walk through it. So once inside of our Django project, you're going to have that manage.py file, and that's going to be the entry point into our Django app. So we're going to always go run Python manage.py followed by some other command to do stuff. There's going to be a settings.py file within our Django project as well. And this is where a lot of the data or a lot of the custom settings of our Django project exists. So this is where we're going to add our Postgres database. There's like a bunch of different stuff we can add. But this is also where we're going to add our app to our Django project. So we also physically have to code in or add our Django app into our Django project. And we're going to do that through this settings.py file. And again, we're going to walk through all this in the next couple of minutes. And then once we're inside of our app, once we actually create an app, it creates all these files and folders for us. So we've got our models, which is our tables. That's where we're actually going to create our database tables. We have views, templates, migrations, URLs, forms, serializers, and plenty of more. Some of these don't exist right away. We're going to have to create them manually, but just know that this is where we're eventually going to be once we actually are building full stack Django apps. But today we're literally only interacting with Django's ORM, their built-in like object relational mapping tool to create tables and interact with our Postgres database. So we're only going to be working with our models today, our models file or directory, and our models file and our migrations directory. So those are the only things we're going to be doing, working with the next 2 days or 3 days. So inside of our models, so right here inside of our app, so first inside of our Django project, we're going to have an app. Inside of our app, we're going to have a file called models. And inside of each model file or inside of our models.py file, this is where we're going to actually create our database tables. And again, this is all going to be done in Python. It's not going to be done in raw SQL anymore because we're going to be using Django's built-in object relational mapping tool, which converts our classes. Or essentially, we're going to be creating classes that represent our tables. And when we run some commands, it's going to map the Python classes that we built and convert them into raw SQL and inject those that SQL into our relational database and create our database tables for us. What questions do you have about this? So if you go back to week 2, when we're doing OOP, when we're literally just creating like class of students, a class of customers, a class of whatever, apple orchards, we're similar. We're going to be writing class objects, and those class objects are going to be mapped over to like raw SQL. Questions?
So models is just the Django word for tables. It's a table.
100%. Yeah. Thank you. So you're going to hear this term models and tables. A model is just a table. What other questions do you have?
So this converts everything into SQL. Is there a need for like typing out like raw SQL if you can do it like in a more efficient way like that?
No, unless like, So there is like not for creating tables or anything like that when you're using Django. Maybe if you're doing like on the job, if you like want to hook into your database and do like some raw SQL commands, you can do that. But like honestly, if you probably won't be writing raw SQL much anymore unless your jobs needs to.
So we don't really use much of the Psycho PG2 module.
Oh no, we definitely need that because we still are using Python to interact with our database or Postgres database. And so we need a library, which is Psycho PG2 to interact with that. So we're going to need to install that library when we do Django. So, and we're going to get into the different libraries that we're going to also need to install. So here, sorry, any other questions? All right. So here's just a quick code snippet of what a model or a table looks like. And we're going to run through all this after this. So inside of our models.py file, we have a class student. So we just create a class object called student, which inherits from the models module inside of Django, the models model class. So in Django, they have a model class that's already there inside the framework, and we're inheriting features and functionality, essentially functionality from that model class. And so it extends to the student class. And now we have two fields or two columns, one of name and one of email. So again, this looks like you're just writing a variable named name, and it equals models.char field. So if you think of SQL, so yeah, you're going to come over here and see this. So this is the Python or Django way of creating a table, a student table with a name field and an email field. What questions do you have about like this syntax? Should be relatively familiar with it.
So do you not have to do like a dunder init on
Nope.
a models class?
Nope, you don't need to do any dunder inits on the model class. So what kind of variable does this kind of look like from a class perspective or OOP perspective? Just curious.
Class variable.
Would it be
Variable, yeah. Class.
Yeah. So yeah, it'd be like a class variable.
And not null will be default.
Not null. So I think for the char field, so again, this models.char field, that's a built-in class for character field. So yeah, I think the default is not null. So I think it has to have a value in there by default. So once we create our model, we can run a migration script. So we run a command called Python manage.py, make migrations, and then followed by our app name. So what this does, we'll literally create another file, a script file that will, when executed, will actually convert this code into raw SQL and inject it into our database. So once we create a migration script, it stores it in the migrations directory right here. And then in order to execute that and inject that into our Postgres database, we run Python manage.py migrate. It could also be just migrate or migrate followed by our application's name, our app name.
I have a question.
Yep.
So you said you migrate manage. Does it convert the name from models, or is that a typo?
Where?
See how like the green box at the top?
Right here?
Yep.
So does it change? No,
'Cause-
so I'm sorry, what was your question?
So when you go down to create migration script, it says to insert Python manage.py instead of models.py.
Oh no, so this is the manage.py file is always there, and it's the entry point into our app. So you'll be running Python manage.py followed by commands all the time. So anytime you want to interact with our app, it's usually Python manage.py followed by some other command.
I see.
So Python manage.py, make migrations, followed by our app name. It creates a script file like 0001 if it's the very first time you're doing it, initial.py. And so this is a script file that it automatically generates it for us. And then when we run that file, we don't actually have to execute this initial.py, but when you run Python manage.py migrate, it knows to look in the migrations file or directory, look for the most recent script file and executes that. It runs some raw, converts that file or runs that file, which creates some probably raw SQL, and then it inserts it into our database.
So question on that, are you having to manually do that command of migrate every time you need to create a new table? Or like, is there a way that in the end you just created a program or a script itself that runs your migration for you?
No, you always have to create a migration script anytime you create or modify your database tables. So
Okay.
if I run this and I create everything and I'm like, oh crap, I don't want I don't want email field to be a char field. I want it to be an email field, which is an actual model. So if I change that to email field, I'm going to have to rerun a migration script, which creates another script file. And then I'm going to also have to run Python manage.py migrate to change that.
And the name of the table comes from the class name. So this would be, does this take student as the table name?
So you're going to see that it's going to be, when the tables are created, it's going to be the Django project name, followed by underscore, followed by the table name. So student. So we're going to walk through this. So if I create a project called attendance, and inside my attendance Django project, I have an app called like, I don't know, something. It'll be attendance underscore students. And that's going to be the name of the table inside of our database.
For this example, will it add an S to it, or?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it adds an S to, it automatically makes it plural.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I'm pretty confident it does, but we'll figure that out.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
Why did name equals models.char field? Why did you say that was a class variable? Like, is because of no self?
Yep.
And is it appropriate to think of it as a class variable, or will that be?
Yeah, I would think that that's an appropriate way to think of it. If we're talking about OOP in Python, this would be a class variable.
Okay.
And yeah, so we're not going to be using dunder init anymore, or I don't want to say anymore, but when we're defining our models, we're not going to be using the dunder init method.
Okay.
Cool. All right. What time is it? Let's go ahead and take a 7-minute break, no, 8-minute break, and we'll jump into actually doing this from scratch, like via the command line. So yeah, be back at 10:20, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So let's go ahead and actually create a Django project and some apps and connect to a Postgres database, create a model, and run a migration script, and then insert that model into our database. All right. So I'm in this directory called Django ORM because that's what we're going to be talking about in the next few days. Can everyone see this? Good. All right.
Yeah.
So the first thing we're going to do is create a virtual environment. So I'm going to run the command Python -m venv, and now I can call like this virtual environment anything. I can literally call this virtual environment anything I want. But I'm just going to call it venv, stands for virtual environment, just to keep things similar. So I don't have to, I'm going to call all my virtual environments venv just so I don't have to memorize what the virtual environment for the Django project is called. So when I click that, it created a directory called venv. And so it's creating it. There, it created it. Next, I want to go into my virtual environment. So Python venv, the name of my virtual environment, followed by bin activate. Uh-oh, what just happened?
I think you need to use source.
Oh, yep. Let's look down here. Yep. Thank you. So source, not course, sort venv bin activate. So notice how when I went into my virtual environment, before I wasn't in my virtual environment, now it prepends this venv, which is the name of my virtual environment, to this directory. So now I'm in my virtual environment. If I ever want to get out of my virtual environment, I can just type deactivate. And now I'm no longer in it.
Is it convention to name your virtual environment venv?
I think it's just user preference, but I see venv used a lot. All right, so I'm currently in my virtual environment. So, and I can see if I run pip list, the only things that are installed in this virtual environment is pip and setup tools. And I can upgrade this if I want to. So if I do pip install upgrade pip, but I'm not going to do that right now because I don't want it to break anything if it does. So the first thing I need to do is install Django. So I do pip install Django. So again, I'm currently in my virtual environment. If I look, so yeah, installing Django. All right. Cool. So if I'm going to clear the screen or clear the terminal, I'm going to do pip list again. And notice how more libraries were installed. So I've got Django is now installed, this PIs, this SQL parse, this ASGIREF. I don't know what any of this does, but these are the other libraries that were installed when I installed the Django. All right. Cool. So now I want to create a Django project. Whoa.
Sorry, what's the difference between pip list and pip freeze?
Pip freeze will create a requirements.txt file, or like it freezes all the current installed libraries inside of your current virtual environment, where pip list just lists all the installed packages. All right. Let's see. So next, we're going to have to install, or we're going to actually have to start a Django project. So I'm just going to do, what is the command? Django admin. So I've got Django installed. So I'm going to run Django admin start project, followed by the project name. So I'm just going to call it school project. So Django-admin start project school project. Let me zoom in a little bit. There we go.
So you don't actually need the angled brackets in there.
The angle brackets, no. Nope. Oh yeah. So yeah, no, you don't need that. That's just like a placeholder that this is where your project name goes. So school Django-admin space start project school project. Oh, I get an error. It says command error, school-project is not a valid project name. Please make sure the name is a valid identifier. So when you're creating project names, you can't use dashes when declaring a project name. And I don't think you can use special characters. So I'm going to use an underscore for my project. And note, watch up here where my virtual environment is when I create this Django project. It creates a directory. So let's inspect this directory. So inside of our school project, it creates a school project directory. And then inside of there, we have our Django project called school project, as well as this manage.py file. So this is the entry point into our app, this manage.py file. You'll never touch this. So you'll never do anything in here ever. So don't worry about that, but just know that this manage.py file is the entry point into a Django app. And then inside of our school project, we have all these other files, this asgi.py file, this WSGI, this WSGI.py file. You don't really need to know what these, you'll never interact with these WSGI and ASGI files. I think it stands for something server gateway interface. So I think this is just for Django to interact with different servers. So there's that. And now we have our settings.py file for our Django project. And this is where we're going to actually do a lot of customization. So it's got like a security key, base directory, allowed hosts, our installed apps. So we're going to be using this a lot. So installed apps, these are all the predefined built-in Django apps that come with Django. So sessions, messages, auth, admin. Comes with some middleware, templates. We'll be covering that later. And then databases. So this is also where we're going to be covering as well. So this is what, how we're going to be connecting our Django app to a database. What questions do you have so far? So the main files, settings, and then we also have URLs, which we'll be covering later on Thursday.
Sorry if you covered this already, Tom, but as far as virtual environments go, is it best practice to like have separate virtual environments per project?
Yes. So every new Django project you create should have its own virtual environment. And the virtual environment should exist within whatever directory your school project or wherever your Django project resides. That's like best practice. So if I had another Django project called, I don't know, military project, it'd probably be in a different directory and it'll also have its own virtual environment. Good questions. All right. Next, what we'll do is create an application. So let's create an attendance application. So what I want to do, I'm currently in the Django ORM. What I'll want to do is go into the same directory as that manage.py file. So I have to go cd school project. So now I'm in my school project. If I list everything out, there's my manage.py file and there's my Django school project app. So now if I look at the command, Python manage.py start app followed by the app name. So let's create an attendance app. Just get rid of that. Python, manage.py, start app, all one word, attendance. And watch over here. So you're going to see the school project. Watch what gets created as well. So we get this attendance app. So it created this new directory. And if you inspect this directory, it has a bunch of different files and directories in here. And notice how I said there's like a migrations directory and a models directory and these other files. Don't worry about all these other files. The only files we're going to be working on today are these models file and this migrations file or directory. So the initial migrations directory has just this init.py file in it right away. So it's pretty much empty. It just has that one file right now. Inside of our models, inside of our attendance application, this is where we're going to actually create our models or our tables. All right. Let's see. So cool. All right. So we created our Django project, school project, and we created a Django app called attendance. What questions do you have about that process?
If attendance is an app in the school project, how come that attendance folder isn't created inside of that second school project folder?
That's just the way the Django wants it.
Okay.
That's the way the Django framework works.
That's the way things are, Christian.
Yep. So your Django apps and the Django project will always be on the same level as your manage.py file. Just so if things aren't working right, and like so attendance or your Django app, your Django project should all be on the same level as your manage.py file.
Quick question. Where did you get your models.py file? Because you lost me there really quick.
Inside of my Django app, the attendance app has a models.py file.
Okay.
All right.
I have another question about the file structure. I thought that shouldn't everything be inside the virtual environment folder? It seems like it's outside of it.
Yeah, no. So the virtual environment. So inside of this Django ORM directory, that's where my virtual environment is. Now your virtual environment can go inside of here, inside of the school project. That's up to you, but everything should still work. So yeah, nothing actually goes inside of this your virtual environment directory. Nothing actually goes physically inside of there, like from a directory or file standpoint.
Okay.
So as long as you can see that you have Venv, like your virtual environment, as long as you can see that you're in your virtual environment.
I wouldn't necessarily.
I was talking about the one alongside your TA preet at.
I can technically still be in this virtual environment and navigate around my local machine and still be within this virtual environment. As long as I've navigated into it, as long as I install stuff in here, if I do like pip install, whatever, it'll still install into this specific virtual environment. So I wouldn't think of virtual environment as a physical directory that everything is installed, like everything must exist in. It's just a place where you can install libraries, frameworks, and everything. And when you go into that virtual environment, you have access to those libraries and frameworks anywhere on your local machine, as long as you're within that virtual environment. So you don't have to physically move directories inside of the virtual environment. All right. So I've got my attendance app, that manage.py file, and the school project. Does somebody have a question? All right. So inside of my school project, I just opened up my settings.py file. And if I navigate down to where it says databases, the default database, the engine, it's using a SQLite database, which is literally just a file that you're able to run SQL commands on, but you're never going to use a SQLite database in production. So let's actually use a Postgres database. So the first thing we're going to do is create a database called school. I may have already created one, but let's see. So create DB school. So I've already created one. I'm going to drop that database and recreate it. All right. And again, I'm still in my virtual environment. So create DB school. I'm just going to make sure that that exists by doing PSQL school. Cool. There's my school database. If I do \D, cool. There's nothing inside of my school database. But I want to utilize Python to interact with a Postgres database. What library do I need to install in order to do that?
That psychop-G.
Yep. So if I do pip list again, just to see what's installed. All right, cool. So I want to install psychop-G2. So pip install ps psychop-G2. Is that it? PG2. All right, it's loading, it's installing. Cool. Now I can test, I can just pip list again. There's my psychop-G2, it's installed. I'm gonna clear that. But now I wanna connect that school database that I just created in the command line to my Django project. So instead of using the SQLite database, I'm going to want to use a Postgres database. So I'm going to do PostgreSQL. So Django DB backends PostgreSQL. That means I'm going to be using a Postgres database. And the name of that database is going to be called school. So I'm going to remove that. And that name of that database that I created is called school. So inside of my settings.py file, inside of my school Django project, inside of databases, the default database, I replaced the SQLite 3 with PostgreSQL, and then the name is the name of the database that I created. Questions?
If you input right there the name of a database that doesn't exist, it'll throw you an error eventually.
Yeah, you'll get an error. All right, so I connected my school database to my Django project. I also have this attendance app that I created, but the attendance app is not connected to my Django project yet. So inside my settings.py file, up into installed apps, I'm going to add the attendance app that I created right here. I'm going to leave a comma there for future developers. It's not required, but I'll leave it there. What questions do you have about connecting the installed attendance app to my Django project through the installed apps?
That last comma won't throw an error?
No,
there's
it
no.
won't. Yeah. Okay. If I did this, it'd be fine. All right. So I created this attendance app. Now inside of our models, let's go ahead and create a student model. So again, this is just standard OOP. I'm going to create a class object called student. So class student. And it's going to inherit from the models module inside of Django. And it's going to specifically inherit the model class. So there's some functionality in there. And the columns that maybe I want inside of the student table or student model, let's just say it's a name, and let's make it a models.char field, and it has a max length of 200. And let's see, what else do I want? Let's do email equals models dot char field. So it's already like kind of knows max length. So notice how as I'm typing this out, one of my, I think it's IntelliSense that already knows that this needs a max length to it. Cool. What questions do you have about that?
So if you wanted to add an additional attribute to like name and make that something else, you would just add another models dot something to the name variable.
So like, what do you like max length or not null type of stuff?
Yeah, another attribute that
Okay.
like you would apply in the SQL. I'm guessing there's additional things you can add. So you would just.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, continue. I'm gonna cut you off.
So I'm guessing you would just say the name equals and the models dot and then whatever that method is.
So if you wanted to add additional attributes, so this is a char field, so a character field or a text field. If you're doing raw SQL, if you wanted to add additional attributes to this char field, like there's like a bunch of stuff you can add, like
more like not a character field, but a different attribute all in itself.
To the name field?
To the name. Yeah, to the name.
Like, well, what are you thinking about? I'm just trying to.
Well, like, if say you wanted to, trying to think of an example.
So the name field will only have this models followed by the type of data it is. So it's a char field, date field, time field, email field, or like some other thing. So that's all we'll ever have. So what's great about Django is Django has excellent documentation. So if I say Django model types or fields, there we go. So here, I've already visited this. So model field reference. If I look over here on the right-hand side, it has the field types, all these different types: auto field, big auto field, Boolean field. So if it's true or false, char field, that's what we're currently using. Date field, date time field, decimal, duration, email field. Maybe I want to use that. File field. And if I click on the char field, it'll say the different attributes that it needs. So it needs at a minimum a max length. And then I can take in different options. And yeah.
So if I wanted to make the name field also the primary key, how would I do that? That's what I'm asking.
Oh, okay.
How do you assign multiple attributes to the same variable?
I don't know how to assign it, like off the top of my head. I don't know how to assign the name field as the primary key. The primary key field will automatically be generated for you. So you don't have to do ID equals primary key or anything like that. But yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, let me know if you can see how you can adjust the primary key field to one of these other attributes or one of these other fields. All right. So we have.
Oh, Thomas, sorry to interrupt. I think you can pass in primary key as a parameter.
You can say like just primary key.
Yeah, primary key equals true. I think we'll do it.
All right. Yeah. Cool.
But I haven't tried it, so.
Yeah. So yeah, essentially any other attributes you'd want to pass in here would go within the field type, like so. All right. So now that all right, this model looks okay for right now. Let's go ahead and convert that model into a migration script. So I'm going to open up migrations. I just wanted to open up this directory to see what happens. So if I do Python manage.py, make migrations, all one word, followed by the name of my app, attendance. Watch right here, watch this directory. It says migrations for attendance, so the migrations for the attendance app, attendance migrations 0001 underscore initial.py, create model student. So over here, this is the file that was created. If I open that up, this was all automatically generated for us. The script, I don't necessarily, I don't know what this migrations, I don't really care what this does, but essentially what this does is we'll convert, when this is executed, we'll convert this model that I created, the student model, into raw SQL and inject it into my database. So you never really want to edit this initial.py file. So I created that script. I'm going to open up Post2Co real quick. I'm going to see. So here's that school. And right now, this is just Post2Co. You can visually see the app or the school database. There's no tables in here. So I created the script to create the table. So now I want to run Python manage.py, migrate, and I can either run migrate the entire application or the entire project, or just the app attendance. So I'm literally just migrating the scripts for the attendance app. If I run that, it says operations to perform, apply all migrations for the attendance app, running migrations, applying attendance dot under the initial.py file. So it ran that file. Okay, everything is good. If I come over here and refresh this, you can see attendance underscore student. That's the name of that model that I just created. It has an ID and a name. ID, name, and email field. And it also created this other Django migrations field as well, or table as well. So Django automatically created that for us. Questions?
So because you didn't specify name to be the primary key, it created a whole column ID as the primary key?
Yep. Yeah, and that's best practice. You generally don't want the name to be a primary key. You always want it to be a unique number value.
You said for this course, we pretty much won't touch the initial.py file. We won't edit the migration.
You'll never edit the migration script.
Is that does that apply like in the workforce?
I don't know, but I would say you would never want to touch that migration script file.
Okay. It seems like, so since it's just an extra step, I feel like there's a way to like just automate that. So whenever, instead of creating the script and then running it, there's a way to run it and create it and then run it all in one command, I can imagine.
Well, you can run commands back to back, but that's the way Django works. They create the script first and then go ahead and inject that into.
Okay, thank you.
So what was the name of the database program you were using?
Oh, that was Post2Co. It's specific to Macs. But if I do PSQL school and I do D, you can see the attendance student table. And if I do \D attendance student, you can see there's the ID, the integer, which is the primary key, name, and email field. And the defaults are not null.
So is Post2Co an extension that you can download in VS Code, or?
No, Post2Co is just a totally separate application, separate from everything. Yeah, it's just a way I can visually see like the tables and everything versus doing it in the command line. All right. So now I ran the migration. I migrated all the scripts for the attendance app. But as we mentioned earlier, so if you go into the settings.py file inside of the Django school project, it has all these other installed apps in here. I just kind of want to show you that if I run just Python manage.py migrate, it already has all these apps, these migration scripts for these apps already inside the Django project. So if I run just migrate, it's going to run the migration scripts for all the apps that haven't ran yet. So if I want to run these migration scripts, I can just run Python manage.py migrate and watch. Those are all the different apps and migration scripts that were applied to my Django project. Auth, admin, and all these different ones. So if I clear it and PSQL school, and now if I do \D, you can see all the different tables that were created in my Django project. You don't really have to worry about all these other Django apps right now. We're going to touch on them later, but just so you know that they do exist. All right. So inside, so I've got my school database and I've got a student table or a attendance students table. Now I'm going to install another app or another library that will make interacting with Django, it just extends the functionality of Django. So I'm going to call Python, or I'm sorry, pip install Django extensions. And in Django extensions, Django extensions just extends the functionality of Django. It adds additional commands that I can run. It's a nice application to have installed in a Django project. However, the Django extensions is also need to be added to Django extensions to my installed app. And that just allows the Django extensions to have to give access to Django or the attendance apps to Django extensions app. And I'm also going to install pip install iPython, which is just another which is just a way to interact with the Python shell. So it's not necessary. So it's just another library that's going to allow me to interact with the Django. So instead of writing Python, I can clear. So I want to interact with my Django project or my database in here. So if I run, where is it? Where'd it go? Yep. So I want to interact with Python manage.py shell plus iPython. Oh, what happened?
You didn't put iPython and you install that.
I don't need to do that. Extensions. So, so Django extensions. So notice how it said module not found error, no module named Django extensions. So when I installed it, it needs to be underscore. So the iPython is just a library that I can install. I don't need to install that into my installed apps. Cool. So now I'm in a shell, so a Django shell. And what this does, that shell plus and the Django extensions allows me to interact with my Django project or just, my Django project in the shell right here. So I don't need to manually do any imports inside of my shell. So now I can literally interact with my database in here. So what's the name? Oh, I'm gonna delete that.
So I got a quick question. What was the second thing called?
iPython.
All right, thank you.
Yep. So now I'm just running Python code. So if I wanted to create a new student object with a name and email field, I can literally just say like student 1 equals student, followed by like the name equals Tom, followed by the email equals tom@email.com. So I'm literally just creating a student object with the name and email field. Again, I don't need any init or anything like that. The name or the columns or the fields just go into here like so. It's just like passing in a parameter. If I click enter, nothing really happens. But if I type student 1, I've got a student object. So I've created a student object inside of my terminal. Now I want to save it to my database. Because if I come over here, just open up my school database, go to my student class or my student table, ID, name, email is nothing right there, but I want to save this student into my database. So I can just say student 1-save. I click enter. And now right here where it says student object none, that none means it wasn't actually saved. Now if I type student 1, I get the ID or like the primary key of that student object. It's literally like running this command in the insert, like the query, the SQL query, insert into students name, Tom. That's exactly like what that's doing. So it's a lot easier to do this than it is to write a long SQL query. So let's create a couple more students. So student 2 equals student name equals Ankur, email equals Ankur@email.com. Now I can student 2. I haven't saved the student object yet. It says none, so I want to save that. Student 2-save. And now if I type student 2, there's my student 2 object saved. And if I come over here and look into Postico and refresh this, I've got Tom and Ankur. Let's go ahead and create another one. So I'm going to say, I'm going to create it from scratch. I'm not going to assign it to a variable. So I'm going to say student name, Chad, email equals Chad@email.com. And now I can do just do .save directly off of that. So that should probably have saved. Let's see if it saved. Cool. So now instead of having to do raw SQL, we're literally just writing Python code, creating student class object, student, passing in parameters, writing do a save method, all of that.
Question, Tom.
Yep.
If you wanted to do, like in SQL, we had a whole file with a lot of insert queries. Are we going to go over that, doing it here?
No, we're not going to go through that right now. Yeah.
Okay. But there is a way to.
Yeah, there's a way you can dump file or data into a database really rapidly. Let's just notice how these student objects, they're not very readable. Does anybody remember the method to make a class object readable?
It's a dunder string.
Yeah, let's see if we can make this a little bit more readable. Def dunder string. I don't even know if I need this. let's actually Google this. Django model dunder string. Let's just see what this looks. I'm going to look at TR. Cool. So again, Django has great documentation. All right. Cool. So I don't know what this is, any of that. Let's actually just leave that. So self.name and self.email. And the reason why we're referencing self is because every time we grab a student object, we need the instance of that field. So I'm going to quit this. Quit. Clear the screen. And I don't know if I have to rerun this migration script. So I just edited the model field, but I don't know if I actually did because I actually don't think I did. So I'm going to actually go back into the shell and create a new student. Actually, I want to grab a student from the database. And if I was doing raw SQL, I'd be like, what would it be? Select star from students. But we're running pure Python now. And I'm going to say like how to query in Django. Just something like that. All right, we've got making queries. So here's an example. Here's how you create an object. Here's how to save an object to the database. We can do author.objects.create, retrieving objects from a database. All right. So I'm going to grab all of the database entries in a database. So it looks like I can just do all entries followed by the table name or the class name, objects.all. So if I come over here and I say all students, so I'm creating a variable called students, student.objects.all. All right, now if I do all students, cool. Look at, I've got a query set. Looks like it's an array, Tom, email. So it's an array, a query set with a length of 3 with all my students.
Is there not an equivalent line of just saying select star from students and it gives you back all the information on the table?
Yeah, this is.
But we had the hard code line 9, right? Like if there's more fields, it would still will only return name and email.
Right. So, well, it's not actually only returning the name and email. It's just displaying the name and email. So it's still returning the entire object. So it's returning the entire object, but it's only displaying the name and field when I'm printing it out, just to make it more readable in the terminal.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I wanted to grab the first element, I could say all students at index 0. That's Tom. I want to, for example, what if I didn't know the name of that? I've got Tom there, an email. If I wanted to grab all students at the first index, which is Ankur's, ankur@email.com, or if I just wanted to grab that entire object, I can grab that entire student object like so. So that's how we can kind of query. But let's say I want to edit this. I'm like, oh crap, I wanted to add a date in here. I want to say date equals, and I'm new. I don't know what to do. I'm new and I don't know what to do. I'm going to say Django model fields. I want to see the different fields that may reference a date. So a model field reference. I'm going to come down here. I've got a date field, date time field. So I'm going to click on the date field and see what that looks like. So here's the date field. Auto now equals false. Auto now add equals true or auto false. I don't know what that means. So it says like what that means. Auto now automatically set the field to now every time the object is saved. Useful for last modified timestamps. Cool. And you can look at it. Auto now add, automatically set the field now when the object is first created. Maybe that's what I want to do. So I'm going to say date models equals date field. Auto now add is true. And I also want to add another attribute. So if you look up here, field options, null, blank, choices. If I click null, you can say has null equals true. So maybe I want this field to possibly be null, so true. All right, so I'm going to quit here. So I made an edit to my database model. Now I'm going to have to make a new migration script file. So I can run Python manage.py, make migrations, attendance. Cool. So okay, migrations for attendance app. So it created a new file 002 student date. So it already knows what the difference is between the first initial .py file and this new one. It says, hey, you added a date field essentially. So it called the file student underscore date. It said add field date to student model.
Hey Tom, what's the command to exit out that exit again?
You
When,
just, type quit, like quit, and then invoke it, like so. All right. Now I created the script. Now I want to Python manage.py migrate that script to the database. And let's see what happens. Cool. I didn't get any errors. That's great. So it ran apply all migrations, admin, attendance, auth, content types, sessions, and it said running migrations, and it ran that student file. So if I come over here, well, actually, let's go back into that shell plus and do student, like all students equals student dot objects dot all. Actually, I don't want to grab all of them. Maybe I just want to grab the first. Maybe I just want to grab the first object. I can literally just type first and invoke it. So I'm going to say first student. I say first student, Tom, an email, but maybe I want to see if the first student has a date on it. Cool. Look at it. It automatically added a timestamp to that date. So date time. So if I actually want to see what that looks like, if I refresh this, so I've got ID, name, email. If I refresh it, maybe it'll have a date. So it automatically added the date. And oh, go ahead.
If we had variables in the models.py file, like if we create that first student equals student objects dot first, can we then call that in iPython or no?
So if you had a variable.
So if that first line that you typed in iPython, first underscore student, if you put that in models.py at the bottom as its own variable, can you then call it in iPython so you don't have to retype it every time?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. But I mean, you can try it. I've never done that before. So I'm going to create a new student equals student. Name equals Ruthie. Email equals Ruthie email.com and run that. So I'm not typing anything in the date field. Let's see what happens. Nothing happened. New student. So I've got new student there. Let's see if it actually saved, because I didn't actually explicitly tell it to save it. So it hasn't saved yet. So I'm gonna actually have to do new student dot save. All right. Now, if I saved it, maybe I want to grab the very last student. So if Ruthie was the last student, I can say like last student equals student dot objects dot last now, because I'm going to grab the last student. Student dot name. There's Ruthie. I can say date. Cool. My date's been put in there. And I can verify that in just my Postico, or I can manually go into my database and see it in the terminal if I wanted to.
So question, Tom, I'm guessing that if you were to change your class of student and you needed to make a new migration to it, you might lose your data in that table, depending on what the change is, right?
Yeah, and it'll throw errors. Like if something doesn't match up, it'll throw an error and it'll tell you like, hey, what do you want me to do? And it'll be like, ignore it, do something else. So it'll throw errors if there's issues with the script or with your models conflicting with what, or your new models conflicting with what was originally put there. All right. Cool. And I can also just do PSQL school, select star from attendance, students. Oh. What did I not? Did I spell something wrong? So what it looks like. Oh, attendance student. So if I go up, there we go. So we also see that here. All right. So we talked about creating a model, putting that, or creating a Django project, creating an app, connecting that app to the Django project in the settings.py file, creating a Postgres database, connecting that Postgres database in to our Django project in the databases in the settings.py file. We talked about we went through creating a model. We went through creating some data in the Python shell and also querying some of that data. So yeah. What questions do you have? And
Should we?
Oh, go ahead.
Should we delete the previous migration file and create a new one, or just leave it as is?
Leave it as is, because you never know if you migrate some data or do a migration script, and you might have to revert back to the old one. What are questions?